Men of Iron, Chapter 29. That night, Myles lodged at Mackworth House. The next morning, as soon as he had broken his fast, which he did in the privacy of his own apartments, the Earl bade him and Gascon make ready for the barge, which was then waiting at the river stairs to take them to Scotland Yard. The Earl himself accompanied them, and as the heavy, snub-nosed boat, rowed by the 6 oarsmen in Mackworth livery, slid slowly and heavily up against the stream, the Earl, leaning back in his cushioned seat, pointed out the various houses of the great priests or nobles, the pale little town residence standing mostly a little distance back from the water behind terraced high-walled gardens and lawns. Yonder was the Bishop of Exeter's close, yonder the Bishop of Bath, that was York House, and that Chester Inn. So, passing by gardens and lawns and palaces, they came at last to Scotland Yard stairs, a broad flight of marble steps that led to a stone platform above, upon which opened the gateway to the garden beyond. The Scotland Yard of Myles Falworth's day was one of the most pretentious and commodious of the palaces of the Strand. It took its name from having been, from ancient times, the London inn which the tributary kings of Scotland occupied when on their periodical visits of homage to England. Now, during the time of Scotland's independence, the Prince of Wales had taken up his lodging in the old palace, and made it noisy with the mad, boisterous mirth of his court. As the watermen drew the barge close to the landing place of the stairs, the Earl stepped ashore, followed by Myles and Gascon. He ascended to the broad gateway of the river wall of the garden. 3 men-at-arms, who lounged upon a bench under the shade of the little pent-roof of a guard-house beside the wall, arose, and saluted as the well-known figure of the Earl mounted the steps. The Earl nodded a cool answer, passing unchallenged through the gate. He led the way up a pleached walkway, beyond which, as Myles could see, there stretched a little grassy lawn, and a stone-paved terrace. As the Earl and the 2 young men approached the end of the walkway, they were met by the sound of voices and laughter, the clinking of glasses and the rattle of dishes. Turning a corner, they came suddenly upon a party of young gentlemen, who sat at a late breakfast under the shade of a widespread lime tree. They had evidently just left the tilt-yard, for 2 of the guests, sturdy, thick-set young knights, still wore a part of their tilting armor. Beyond the merry scene stood the grey, hoary old palace, a steep flight of stone steps, and a long, open, stone-arched gallery, which evidently led to the kitchen beyond, for along it hurried serving-men, running up and down the tall flight of steps, bearing trays and dishes and cups and flagons. It was a merry sight, and a pleasant one. The day was warm and balmy, and the yellow sunlight fell in waving, uncertain patches of light, dappling the tablecloth, and twinkling and sparkling upon the dishes, cups, and flagons. At the head of the table sat a young man some 3 or 4 years older than Myles, dressed in a full suit of rich blue brocaded velvet, embroidered with gold thread and trimmed with black fur. His face, which was turned toward them as they mounted from lawn to the little stone-flagged terrace, was frank and quite open, the cheeks smooth and fair, the eyes dark and blue. He was tall and rather slight, and wore his thick yellow hair hanging to his shoulders, where it was cut square across, after the manner of the times. Myles did not need to be told that this was indeed the Prince of Wales. "Ho, Gaffer Fox," he cried as soon as he caught sight of the Earl of Mackworth. "What wind blows you hither among us wild mallard drakes? I warranted it is not for love of us, but only to fill your own larder after the manner of Sir Fox among the drakes. Oh, who is with you? Some gosling ye are about to pluck?" A sudden hush fell upon the company, and all faces were turned toward the visitors. The Earl bowed with a soft smile. "Your Highness," said he smoothly, "is pleased to be pleasant. Sir, I bring you the young knight of whom I spoke to you some time since, Sir Myles Falworth. You may be pleased to bring to mind that you so condescend as to promise to take him into your service, until the fitting time arrived for that certain matter of which we spoke." "Oh, Sir Miles," said the Prince of Wales, with a frank, pleasant smile, "I have heard great reports of your skill and prowess in France, both from Mackworth and from others. It will pleasure me greatly to have you in my household, more especially," he added, "as it will get you, callow as you are, out of my Lord Fox's clutches. Our faction cannot do without the Earl of Mackworth's cunning wits, Sir Miles. Nevertheless, I would not like to put all my fate and fortune into his hand without bond. I hope that you do not rest your fortunes entirely upon his aid and his countenance." All who were present felt the discomfort of the prince's speech. It was evident that one of his mad, wild humours was upon him. In another case, the harebrained young courtiers around might have taken their cue from him, but the Earl of Mackworth was no subject for their gibes and witticisms. A constrained silence fell, in which the Earl alone maintained a perfect ease of manner. Miles bowed to hide his own embarrassment. "Your Highness," said he evasively, "I rest my fortune first of all upon God, his strength, and his justice." "No, you will find safer dependence there than upon the Lord of Mackworth," said the prince dryly. "But come," he added, with a sudden change of voice and manner, "these be jests that border too closely upon bitter earnest for a merry breakfast. It is ill to idle with edged tools. Will ye not stay and break your fast with us, my lord?" "Pardon me, your Highness," said the Earl, bowing and smiling the same smooth smile his lips had worn from the first. Such a smile as Miles had never thought to have seen upon his haughty face. "I crave your good leave to decline. I must return home presently, for your uncle, his Grace of Winchester, is awaiting my coming upon the business you know of. No doubt your Highness will find more joyance in a lusty young knight like Sir Miles than in an old crafty fox like myself. So I leave him with you, in your good care." Such was Miles' introduction to the wild young madcap of the Prince of Wales, afterward the famous Henry V, the conqueror of France. For a month or more thereafter he was a member of the princely household, and after a little while a trusted and honoured member. Perhaps it was the calm, sturdy strength, the courage of the young knight, the first appeal to the prince's royal heart. Perhaps afterward it was the more sterling qualities that underlaid that courage that drew him to the young man. Certain it was that in 2 weeks Miles was the acknowledged favourite. He made no protestation of virtue. He always accompanied the prince in those madcap ventures to London, where he beheld all manner of wild revelry. He never held himself aloof from his gay comrades, but he looked upon all their mad sports with the same calm gaze that had carried him without taint through the courts of Burgundy and the Dauphin. The gay, rostering young lords and gentlemen dubbed him St. Miles, and jested about him with haircloth shirts and flagellations. But witticism and jest alike failed to move Miles' patient virtue. He went his own gait in the habits of his life, and in so going knew as little as the others of the mad court that the prince's growing liking for him was, perhaps more than all else, on account of that very temperance. Then by and by the prince began to confide in him, as he did in none of the others. There was no great love between the king and his son. It was happened very often that the kings of England have felt bitter jealousy toward the heirs apparent, as they have grown in power, and such was the case with the great King Henry IV. The prince often spoke to Miles of the clashing and jarring between himself and his father, and the thought began to come to Miles' mind by degrees that maybe the king's jealousy accounted not a little for the prince's reckless intemperance. Once, for example, as the prince leaned upon his shoulder waiting, while the attendants made ready the barge that was to carry them down the river towards the city, he spoke abruptly. "Miles, what think ye of us all? Does not your honesty hold us in contempt?" "Nay, your Highness," said Miles. "How could I hold contempt?" "Marry," said the prince, "I myself hold contempt, and I'm not as honest a man as ye. But prithee, have patience with me, Miles. Some days perhaps too I will live a clean life. Now, if I live seriously, the king will be more jealous of me than ever, and that is not a little. Maybe I live thus so that he may not know what I really am or think." The prince also often talked to Miles concerning his own affairs, of the battle he was to fight for his father's honour, of how the Earl of Mackworth had plotted and planned to bring him face to face with the Earl of Alban. He spoke to Myles more than once of the many great challenges of state and party that hung upon the downfall of the enemy of the House of Falworth, and showed him how no hand but his could strike that enemy down. If he fell, it must be through the son of Falworth. Sometimes it seems to Myles as though he and his blind father were the center of some great web, a plot and intrigue, stretching far, stretching wide, that included not only the great houses of England, but royalty and the political balance of their own country as well. Even before the greatness of it all, he did not flinch. Then at last came the beginning of the time for action. It was in the early part of May, and Myles had been a member of the prince's household for a little over a month. One morning he was ordered to attend the prince in his privy cabinet. Obeying these summons, he found the prince, his younger brother, the Duke of Bedford, and his uncle, the Bishop of Winchester, seated at a table, where they had been refreshing themselves with wine and with wafer. "My poor Myles," said the prince, smiling as the young knight bowed to the three, and then stood erect as though on duty. "It shames my heart, brother, and ye uncle, it shames my heart, to be one privy to this thing which we are set out to do. Here be we, the greatest lords of England, making a cat's paw of this lad, for he is only yet a boy, and of his blind father, to achieve our ends against Albin's faction. It seems not over-honourable to my own mind." "Oh, pardon me, your highness," said Myles, blushing to the roots of his hair, "but if I may be so bold as to speak, I know nothing of what your aims may be, but I only look to the restoring of my father's honour, and the honour of our own house." "Truly," said the prince, smiling, "that is the only matter at all that makes me willing to lay my hands on you and this business. Do ye know why I have sent for you? It is because this day you must challenge the Duke of Alban before the very king. The Earl of Mackworth has laid all his plans, and this time is now ripened to fruit. Do you know that your father is at Mackworth House?" "Nay," said Myles, "I knew it not." "Oh, he has been there for nearly 2 days," said the prince. "Just now the Earl has sent for us to come first to Mackworth, then to the palace, for he has gained an audience with the king, and has so arranged it that the Earl of Alban is to be there as well. We will all go straight away, so get yourself ready as soon as is possible." Perhaps Myles' heart began beating more quickly within him at the nearness of that great happening, which he had looked forward to for so long. If it did, he made no sign of his outer emotion, but only asked, "How must I clothe myself, your highness?" Wear your light armor," said the prince, "but no helmet. A tunic bearing the arms and colours that the Earl gave you when you were knighted, and carry your right-hand gauntlet under your belt for your challenge. Now make ye haste, for the time it approaches."